When disaster strikes, it does more than break buildings. It breaks routines, memories, and a sense of safety. Houses turn to ash, streets turn to rivers, whole towns vanish overnight. But the story doesn't end there. Rebuilding isn't just about bricks and wood, it's about what those walls mean. It's about refusing to let loss have the final word. When we rebuild, we send a message to the world and to ourselves. We endured. We return. We rise. Let's talk about why people rebuild after tragedy, what it costs, what it heals, and why starting again is one of the most powerful things we can do. A disaster strikes without warning, leaving behind silence that feels heavy and strange. In the first moments after a fire, flood, earthquake, or violent conflict, people often cannot believe what has happened. They look at the ruins of their homes or search for loved ones, their minds struggling to make sense of it. Grief does not arrive all at once. At first, there is shock, a numbness that makes everything feel distant and unreal. In those first hours, people move almost automatically, driven by instinct rather than thought. They search for water, for food, for a safe place to stay. They try to find missing family members or neighbors. In the chaos, decisions are made quickly, sometimes without full understanding of the risks or consequences. These early hours are marked by confusion and noise. Sirens wail, people shout names, animals roam loose, smoke lingers in the air. In a flood, the water may still be rising, carrying away memories and objects that once gave life structure. After an earthquake, the ground may continue to shake in smaller tremors, leaving survivors unsure if it is truly over. In a conflict zone, the sound of gunfire or explosions may return without warning. The mind cannot process so much at once, so it focuses on the next breath, the next step, the next moment. People grab what they can carry: blankets, a bag of clothes, a family photo if there is time. Most things are left behind. In Neelam Valley, a sudden fire swept through a cluster of homes one night. The flames spread quickly because the houses were built close together and made of wood. Families woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of neighbors pounding on doors. Some ran out with nothing but the clothes they were wearing. Others tried to save belongings, only to realize the fire was too strong. By morning, the village was a blackened ruin. People sat in the cold, staring at the ashes where their lives had been. There was no clear plan for what to do next. Government officials promised aid, but it would take days to arrive. Until then, the families relied on each other, sharing food and shelter where they could. In these moments, survival comes first. Parents focus on keeping their children warm and fed. Neighbors help each other move debris, search for anyone missing, or guard what remains of their homes. Even in grief, there is action, because action pushes away fear. But when the first rush ends and the immediate danger passes, a different kind of struggle begins. Survivors face questions about the future, questions that do not have easy answers. The most difficult of these is whether to stay and rebuild or to leave. Staying means facing the ruins every day. It means finding the strength to start again in the same place where the tragedy happened. For many, their land is tied to their identity. It may have been in their family for generations. Their neighbors are often relatives or lifelong friends. Leaving would mean losing not only a house, but also a way of life. In Neelam Valley, some families spoke of their ancestors who had lived there for centuries. The mountains, the river, the fields, all were part of their history. To abandon them would feel like betraying the past. Yet rebuilding is not simple. Materials cost money. Labor takes time and energy. The same fire that destroyed homes also destroyed tools, livestock, and stores of food. If the area remains unsafe, if floods or earthquakes are likely to strike again, some may wonder if staying is worth the risk. In places affected by conflict, rebuilding may be impossible if fighting continues. Even when physical danger fades, memories linger. Some people cannot bear to live where they lost loved ones. For them, every corner, every burned tree is a reminder of what happened. Leaving brings its own hardships. Families who move must find new homes, new jobs, new schools for their children. They may go to a nearby town, or they may travel far away to a city where they know no one. There, they may face discrimination or poverty. They may live crowded in temporary shelters for months or years. The sense of community they once had can vanish. In Neelam Valley, a few families decided to go to relatives in other regions, hoping for better opportunities. They packed what little they had and walked away, unsure if they would ever return. This decision is not only personal, it affects the entire community. If too many leave, the village may never recover. Fields may go untended, shops may close, and schools may shut down. Those who stay may feel abandoned or overwhelmed by the work of rebuilding alone. On the other hand, if everyone stays, resources may be stretched too thin and recovery may stall. The balance between staying and leaving can shape the future for decades. Survivors often make these choices under pressure. Aid agencies may offer relocation packages, or governments may encourage people to move to safer areas. Friends and family may have strong opinions, urging them to stay or go. In the end, each family must weigh its own needs, fears, and hopes. Some may stay because they cannot imagine life elsewhere. Others may leave because they want safety and stability for their children. Neither choice is easy, and both carry loss. In the days after the fire in Neelam Valley, people gathered each evening around shared meals. They talked about their options. Some were determined to rebuild, speaking of how they would cut new timber, gather stones from the river, and raise walls again before winter. Others were silent, their faces drawn. They were already thinking of distant relatives, of bus tickets, of unfamiliar towns. There was no argument, only quiet understanding that each person's path was different. Disasters tear apart more than buildings. They test the bonds between people and the strength of traditions. They force decisions that shape not only individual lives, but also the fate of entire communities. In the smoke and silence that follow tragedy, the future begins with a single question: do we stay or do we go? Each answer is a step into the unknown, taken with equal parts courage and sorrow. After tragedy, people often feel broken, yet something inside pushes them to move forward. This inner force is resilience. It's not always visible in the first days after disaster, when shock and grief take hold, but it begins to appear quietly. Humans are wired to recover because survival depends on it. When faced with loss, the mind and body search for ways to regain balance. Even when everything is gone, the drive to rebuild remains. It's not only about houses or roads, but about restoring meaning to life. Rebuilding is more than practical work. It's a statement. When a person clears rubble, lays a brick, or plants a new tree, they're saying that destruction will not be the final word. This act of creation fights despair. It turns helplessness into purpose. In places struck by disaster, you often see this change. In the beginning, people sit among ruins, silent and stunned. Days later, they begin to gather tools, share plans, and take the first steps to rebuild. The progress may be slow, but each step matters. It gives a sense of control after chaos. It proves that survival is not just about living through disaster, but also about shaping what comes next. History shows that this instinct to rebuild has been part of human life for centuries. Ancient Rome burned many times. Fires spread quickly through its crowded streets and wooden buildings. Each time, Romans faced ruin, yet they cleared the ashes and rebuilt their city. They did not simply replace what was lost. They redesigned streets, built stronger walls, and created systems to prevent future fires. The city grew more complex and resilient with each disaster. The cycle of destruction and renewal became part of its identity. London faced a similar trial in 1666 when a massive fire destroyed most of the city. Thousands lost their homes. The air was filled with smoke and fear. People slept in fields outside the city, wondering if London would ever rise again. Slowly, rebuilding began. Instead of wooden houses, they used brick and stone. Streets were widened to slow future fires. The decision to rebuild was not just about structures. It was about preserving London as a center of trade, culture, and life. In less than a decade, the city was thriving again, shaped by the lessons of the fire. In 1906, San Francisco experienced a devastating earthquake, followed by fires that consumed entire neighborhoods. The destruction was so complete that some leaders considered abandoning the city and building elsewhere. The people refused. Citizens camped in parks and open spaces while planning their return. Merchants set up shops in tents to keep business alive. Within a year, streets were cleared and reconstruction was underway. The rebuilt city stood as proof of determination. San Francisco's revival showed how ordinary people, through steady effort, could bring a city back from total ruin. The instinct to rebuild is not limited to the past. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans with overwhelming force. The storm itself was deadly, but the flooding that followed caused even greater damage. Whole neighborhoods were submerged. Families were trapped on rooftops or forced to evacuate to distant cities. In the days after the storm, the images of waterlogged streets and stranded residents shocked the world. The destruction seemed too vast to fix. Many expected New Orleans to fade, its culture scattered and its people dispersed. Yet in the heart of the disaster, grassroots leaders emerged. These were local residents, community organizers, and small business owners who refused to let their city disappear. They began by meeting basic needs. They organized food distribution, temporary shelters, and cleanup crews. Churches, local musicians, and restaurant owners became central to the recovery effort. Music played a powerful role. New Orleans is known for jazz, brass bands, and street parades. After Katrina, musicians returned to play in damaged streets and parks. Their performances reminded people of who they were and what they shared. Even when buildings were gone, the sound of horns and drums brought back hope. Food also became a source of strength. Restaurants reopened in makeshift spaces, serving gumbo and red beans to volunteers and residents. These meals were more than sustenance. They were acts of cultural revival. Recovery did not come from government aid alone. Federal help was slow, and many official plans failed to address the needs of specific neighborhoods. Local groups filled the gaps. They organized rebuilding efforts, house by house, block by block. Residents who had evacuated returned to find their communities still alive through these small, determined actions. Slowly, schools reopened. Markets came back. Parades resumed during Mardi Gras, even if the costumes were patched together from scraps. The work of rebuilding New Orleans showed how resilience comes from both individuals and groups. A single person clearing debris from their home is part of a larger story. Neighbors supporting each other create networks of care that grow stronger with each shared task. Cultural traditions like music and food tie people to their history while giving them strength for the future. Even when physical structures are gone, these connections keep the spirit of a place alive. Rebuilding also challenges despair on a personal level. After a disaster, some people feel overwhelmed by grief. They may believe that nothing they do will matter. When they join others in reconstruction, they see visible proof that effort leads to change. A cleared street, a repaired roof, or a reopened shop becomes a sign of progress. These signs encourage more action. Hope grows not through speeches or promises, but through shared labor and visible results. In New Orleans, this was clear in the lower Ninth Ward, one of the areas hit hardest by flooding. Early on, it looked abandoned, with houses collapsed and streets covered in mud. Volunteers and residents began cleaning it step by step. At first, it seemed impossible. Then, months later, new houses stood where wreckage had been. Children played in yards again. The neighborhood was different, but it was alive. Each nail hammered, each wall painted, was a refusal to give in to loss. Across time and place, humans have faced disasters that seemed too great to overcome. Fires, floods, earthquakes, and wars have destroyed cities and scattered populations. Yet over and over, people return. They rebuild because survival is not only about staying alive. It is about creating spaces where life has meaning. Rebuilding connects past and future. It honors what was lost while shaping what will come. This deep drive to rebuild is part of what makes communities endure, even when faced with destruction. People feel a deep connection to the places they call home. This bond goes beyond walls and streets. It grows from shared history, family stories, and the rhythms of daily life. A village square where children play, a field worked by many generations, a street where neighbors greet one another. These are more than physical spaces. They hold memories. These memories give a sense of belonging that is hard to replace. When a disaster destroys these spaces, people do not only lose buildings, they lose a part of themselves. This attachment to place often begins long before a person is born. Families pass down stories about how the land was farmed, how the river once flooded, or how the first houses were built. These stories tie individuals to the past and give meaning to the present. A tree planted by a grandparent, a church rebuilt after an old fire, a marketplace that has stood for centuries. Each carries the weight of memory. When people walk these familiar paths, they feel connected to those who came before them. This bond shapes identity in a way that cannot be moved or easily rebuilt elsewhere. When disaster strikes, the destruction threatens not only homes but also this shared history. The loss feels larger than physical damage. It feels like erasure. Entire communities can vanish if people scatter and never return. Streets once filled with voices may fall silent. This is why rebuilding becomes more than survival. It becomes an act of resistance. To rebuild is to say, we are still here. It protects the memory of what existed and the people who lived there. It prevents outsiders, enemies, or even time itself from wiping away a culture. Warsaw, Poland, faced this challenge during the Second World War. The city was bombed repeatedly and then systematically destroyed by occupying forces. By the war's end, most of Warsaw was in ruins. Buildings were burned, landmarks reduced to rubble, and thousands of lives lost. Some thought the destruction was too complete for the city to recover. Others believed rebuilding was pointless, arguing that starting fresh somewhere else would be easier. But the people of Warsaw chose a different path. They decided to rebuild their city exactly as it had been, brick by brick. Using old photographs, paintings, and memories, they reconstructed entire streets and squares. The work was slow and demanding. Craftsmen carved details by hand to match the originals. Families worked side by side to clear debris and lay new foundations. This effort was not only about restoring buildings, it was about restoring the soul of the city. By bringing Warsaw back to life, the people defied those who had tried to erase it. Each rebuilt wall stood as proof that their culture and history would endure. The old town of Warsaw, once nearly gone, became a symbol of this spirit. Tourists who walk its cobblestone streets today see a place that looks centuries old, yet most of it was rebuilt after the war. The reconstruction was so faithful that UNESCO later recognized it as a World Heritage Site. This recognition was not just for the architecture, but for the determination of the people who refused to let their city disappear. Their work showed how rebuilding can be an act of memory as well as construction. In Japan, Hiroshima faced a different kind of devastation. When the atomic bomb fell in 1945, the city was leveled in an instant. Tens of thousands died, and entire neighborhoods vanished. Survivors were left in a landscape of ash and twisted metal. The trauma was not only physical, but deeply emotional. Hiroshima carried the weight of being the first city destroyed by nuclear war. Its people faced the challenge of rebuilding, while also confronting the horror of what had happened. Some argued that Hiroshima should be left as a ruin, a permanent reminder of the bomb's destruction. Others wanted to rebuild quickly, to bring life back to the city. The people of Hiroshima found a balance between these views. They rebuilt their homes, schools, and markets so that life could continue. At the same time, they preserved certain sites as memorials. The atomic bomb dome, a skeletal building left standing near the bomb's center, was kept as a witness to the past. Surrounding it, they created the Peace Memorial Park. This park became a place for reflection and a symbol of hope. Hiroshima's reconstruction was not just about replacing what was lost. It was about transforming pain into purpose. The city became a global voice for peace. Survivors shared their stories to warn the world about the dangers of nuclear weapons. Annual ceremonies marked the bombing, not to dwell on anger, but to promote understanding and healing. Through this approach, Hiroshima showed that rebuilding can also mean redefining a place's identity. The city did not only rise from the ashes, it became a bridge between its tragic past and a vision for a better future. Both Warsaw and Hiroshima reveal the power of cultural memory. In Warsaw, rebuilding aimed to restore what was destroyed exactly as it had been. It was a direct refusal to let history be erased. In Hiroshima, rebuilding took a different path. The city was remade with new purpose, blending remembrance with renewal. In both cases, the act of reconstruction preserved identity in ways that went beyond physical structures. This deep connection to place and memory explains why people so often return after disaster. Even when logic suggests moving elsewhere, the pull of home is strong. A rebuilt street may not match the old one perfectly, but it carries the same stories and connections. When children play where their grandparents once played, when families gather at a familiar spot to celebrate or mourn, the past lives on. These moments keep a community's heart beating. Sometimes outsiders do not understand this attachment. They may see only practical concerns, whether the land is safe, whether rebuilding costs too much, whether moving would be easier. To those who belong to the place, these questions miss the point. A home is not just a shelter, and a city is not just a collection of buildings. They are living expressions of history and identity. In both Warsaw and Hiroshima, rebuilding required immense effort. It demanded resources, time, and emotional strength. Yet the people persisted because the work mattered on a level deeper than survival. Clearing rubble, laying bricks, planting trees, these were acts of remembrance. They were ways of saying that what was destroyed would not vanish from the world. Through rebuilding, they carried forward the memory of those who had lived, struggled, and loved in those spaces. When people rebuild, they protect more than physical structures. They protect the stories that define who they are. They pass those stories to the next generation, ensuring that even in the face of destruction, identity remains unbroken. This is why, after disaster, the sight of a single repaired home or a reopened marketplace is so powerful. It signals not only recovery, but also the survival of a community's spirit. When disaster strikes, people often discover a strength they did not know they had. The first hours and days are filled with confusion and fear, yet beneath the shock, communities begin to move as one. Neighbors check on each other, share food, and search for those who are missing. This instinct to help comes from a simple truth. Survival is rarely an individual act. Humans have always depended on one another. In times of crisis, this connection becomes visible and powerful. Solidarity is not just about kindness, it is practical. After a flood or earthquake, government aid may take days or weeks to arrive. In the meantime, local people are the first responders. A farmer may use his tractor to clear a blocked road. A shop owner may open her doors to give supplies to those who lost everything. Families may take in neighbors whose houses are gone. These actions create a foundation for recovery long before outside help arrives. Mutual aid builds trust at a moment when fear could easily turn to anger or despair. When people see others working beside them, they feel less alone. A shared task, like clearing debris from a street or repairing a school, creates a sense of purpose. Even small acts, offering a blanket, sharing a meal, carrying water, remind survivors that they are part of something larger than their own pain. This shared effort strengthens the bonds that hold a community together. As rebuilding begins, solidarity must grow beyond immediate relief. Recovery is not only about restoring buildings, it is also about restoring systems that keep people safe and healthy. Some communities innovate in the way they rebuild, using lessons learned from past disasters. In areas prone to floods, houses may be raised on stilts. In earthquake zones, builders may use flexible materials and designs that can withstand shaking. Roads and bridges may be reinforced so they do not collapse under stress. These improvements save lives when the next disaster comes. Mental health is another crucial part of recovery. Disasters do not just damage structures, they leave deep wounds in the mind. Survivors may experience nightmares, anxiety, or numbness. If these feelings are ignored, they can grow worse over time. Communities that integrate mental health services into their rebuilding plans create a more complete recovery. Counselors can meet with families to help them process grief. Group sessions can give people a space to share their experiences and support one another. When emotional healing happens alongside physical reconstruction, the entire community grows stronger. Sometimes the greatest challenge after a disaster is not repairing buildings, but repairing relationships. This was especially true in Rwanda after the genocide of 1994. In just a few months, hundreds of thousands were killed, and entire villages were torn apart. The violence did not come from outside forces alone. Neighbors turned against neighbors, and families were split by fear and hatred. When the killing ended, the country faced a question unlike any other: how to rebuild not only homes and roads, but also trust. Many survivors returned to find their homes destroyed and their communities shattered. The physical damage was immense, but the emotional damage was even deeper. People lived side by side with those who had harmed them or their families. The weight of anger and grief was overwhelming. Some wanted revenge, others wanted to flee. Yet for the country to move forward, people had to find a way to live together again. Rwanda began a series of reconciliation programs designed to bring people face to face with the past. One of the most important tools was the Gacaca court system, based on traditional community justice practices. Instead of relying only on formal courts, which were overwhelmed, villages held local gatherings where survivors and perpetrators could speak. Those who had taken part in violence were encouraged to confess their actions. In return, they could receive reduced sentences if they showed genuine remorse. This process was painful and often emotional, but it allowed communities to begin rebuilding trust. Forgiveness was not demanded, and it did not happen quickly. It was a choice each person made in their own time. Some survivors found strength in hearing the truth spoken aloud. Others drew courage from the idea that their pain could lead to a future without revenge. Over time, these conversations created small bridges between people who had once been enemies. In many villages, former attackers and victims worked together to rebuild homes, schools, and farms. These shared tasks became acts of healing. Rebuilding Rwanda also meant creating spaces where people could grieve together. Memorials were built across the country, marking the sites of mass killings. These places gave families a way to honor their dead and remind future generations of what had happened. By preserving memory, Rwanda tried to ensure that the violence would not be repeated. At the same time, the government invested in programs to improve education, healthcare, and infrastructure. These efforts gave people practical reasons to cooperate and look ahead. The work was far from simple. Distrust lingered and anger sometimes flared. But the combination of reconciliation and rebuilding showed that a shattered society could grow strong again. This was only possible because people chose to act together rather than remain divided. Collective action became the backbone of Rwanda's recovery. The lessons from Rwanda apply to other forms of disaster as well. Whether the crisis comes from war, natural forces, or economic collapse, recovery depends on the strength of relationships. Physical structures can be rebuilt with money and materials, but social unity must be rebuilt through daily acts of care and cooperation. When communities invest in both, they create resilience that lasts beyond the next storm or conflict. Innovations in disaster response continue to grow. Some cities now design entire neighborhoods with safety in mind, placing hospitals and schools on higher ground or using green spaces as flood barriers. Others train local residents in emergency response so they can act quickly when professional help is delayed. These changes save lives and also empower communities to take charge of their future. Even the most advanced systems, however, cannot replace human connection. A sturdy bridge or strong levee matters, but so does the neighbor who knocks on a door to check if an elderly person needs food or medicine. The best rebuilding efforts combine technology with empathy. They recognize that a community is more than its buildings. It is a network of relationships that give meaning to the physical space. When disaster strikes, this network is tested. Some links may break under the strain, but others grow stronger. The people who come together in the darkest moments form the foundation for what comes next. Through mutual aid, shared work, and the courage to face both pain and hope, communities can rise again. Their strength lies not only in what they rebuild, but in how they rebuild it, together. Rebuilding after disaster is not only about strength of spirit or community bonds. It is also about money, permits, and endless decisions. Once the first shock fades, survivors face a long, slow process filled with paperwork and bills. The financial cost of reconstruction can overwhelm even the most determined families. Homes must be repaired or rebuilt, and damaged businesses need new equipment and supplies. Roads, power lines, and water systems require massive investment. Even when aid is available, the gap between what is needed and what is provided is often wide. Insurance is meant to bridge that gap, but it rarely works smoothly. After a hurricane, flood, or wildfire, thousands of people file claims at the same time. Insurance companies move slowly, checking each claim and looking for reasons to deny coverage. Families are left waiting for answers while they live in temporary shelters or with relatives. Some policies do not cover certain types of damage, such as flooding or mold, leaving homeowners with unexpected bills. Those who did not have insurance at all face an even harder road. For them, rebuilding depends entirely on outside aid or personal savings, which may already be gone. Government agencies play a central role in recovery. In the United States, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, steps in to provide assistance. FEMA offers grants for temporary housing, repairs, and basic needs. It also works with local governments to plan long-term rebuilding projects. These efforts can be life-saving, but they are rarely quick. Bureaucracy slows every step. Forms must be filled out correctly. Damage must be documented and verified. Funds must be approved and released in strict stages. A single missing signature or outdated permit can delay an entire project for months. Non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, help fill the gaps. Some are large and international, like the Red Cross. Others are small and local, run by churches or community groups. These organizations often move faster than government agencies because they are closer to the ground. Volunteers can distribute food, help clear debris, or rebuild homes one at a time. However, they have limited resources. They cannot replace the large-scale funding that only governments can provide. The most successful recovery efforts usually combine the reach of official programs with the flexibility of grassroots work. Superstorm Sandy in 2012 showed how complicated these systems can become. The storm struck the east coast of the United States, flooding neighborhoods from New Jersey to New York City. In the immediate aftermath, there was a surge of help. Volunteers arrived with supplies. Local shelters opened their doors. The federal government promised swift action, but as weeks turned into months, frustration grew. Families who had lost their homes applied for aid only to face delays. Some waited years for money to rebuild. Others were forced to live in damaged houses while they battled with insurance companies or city agencies. Entire neighborhoods remained half-empty long after the storm, with boarded-up houses and broken streets. The slow pace was not caused by a lack of will. It was caused by layers of rules and conflicting priorities. Local governments wanted to protect against future storms, which meant stricter building codes and new zoning laws. These changes were important, but they added more steps to an already slow process. Politics also played a role. Federal funds had to be approved by Congress, where debates over budgets and policies dragged on. Meanwhile, people waited in limbo. A family in Staten Island might spend months gathering documents to prove they owned their home, only to be told the paperwork was incomplete. A business owner in New Jersey might rebuild using personal savings, then find out that certain expenses were not eligible for reimbursement. These kinds of obstacles drained energy and hope. Modern disasters add new layers of complexity. Climate change has increased both the frequency and severity of storms, fires, and floods. Areas that were once considered safe are now at risk. Coastal towns face rising seas and stronger hurricanes. Regions that never worried about wildfires now face them every summer. This expansion of danger zones means that more people need help at the same time, stretching systems to their limits. Rebuilding in these conditions requires not only repairing damage, but also preparing for what comes next. A house rebuilt to its old design may not survive the next storm. Stronger materials and higher foundations are now essential in many places. These improvements cost more, and not every family can afford them. Insurance companies respond by raising rates or refusing to cover certain areas at all. This leaves homeowners with difficult choices: pay higher premiums, move away, or take the risk of living without coverage. Some communities have started to rethink how they build entirely. After repeated flooding, certain towns have chosen to buy out homeowners in high-risk areas. The land is then turned into open space, such as parks or wetlands, to absorb future floods. While this approach can save lives, it is emotionally difficult. Families must leave homes that may have been in their families for generations. The decision often sparks heated debate. Wildfire-prone regions face their own challenges. Rebuilding in these areas requires creating defensible space around homes, using fire-resistant materials, and redesigning neighborhoods to slow the spread of flames. These changes can protect lives, but they require strict enforcement and public cooperation. Without them, the cycle of destruction and rebuilding continues year after year. The increasing scale of disasters also affects mental health. Families who experience repeated evacuations or losses may feel constant anxiety. Children may grow up expecting disaster as a normal part of life. This emotional toll adds to the financial strain, creating a heavy burden on both individuals and communities. Grassroots organizations often step in to provide counseling and support, especially in places where formal mental health services are scarce. After Sandy, community centers in New York offered group sessions for storm survivors. These meetings allowed people to share their frustrations and fears while learning practical coping strategies. By addressing emotional recovery alongside physical rebuilding, these programs helped stabilize neighborhoods. As disasters grow more frequent, coordination between agencies, governments, and communities becomes even more important. A single storm can now affect multiple states or even entire countries. Aid must move quickly and be distributed fairly. Technology can help, but only if systems are designed to be simple and accessible. Too often, survivors are asked to navigate confusing websites or fill out forms written in technical language. Simplifying these processes can save both time and lives. The story of Superstorm Sandy offers a clear warning. Without efficient planning and clear communication, even the most well-funded recovery effort can falter. Families deserve more than promises. They need systems that work when everything else has been lost. The practical realities of rebuilding are harsh, but they must be faced directly. Only then can communities move from survival to true recovery, ready to face the storms and fires of an uncertain future. When disaster destroys homes, schools, and entire towns, the work of rebuilding is too large for individuals or local groups to handle alone. Families can repair their own houses, and communities can organize volunteers, but the scale of destruction often reaches far beyond what private resources can cover. Roads, power grids, hospitals, and water systems require huge amounts of money and coordination. Only governments have the capacity to plan and fund projects of that size. Without their involvement, recovery stalls, and entire regions can sink into long-term decline. Government action after disaster is not just practical, it is a responsibility. When a hurricane floods a city or a wildfire burns through a town, the people affected are citizens. They pay taxes, follow laws, and contribute to the nation's economy and culture. In return, they expect their government to protect them, not only during the disaster, but also in its aftermath. Rebuilding is part of that protection. It ensures that a community's identity is preserved and that people are not left to face ruin alone. Some disasters are so massive that private charities and insurance companies cannot keep up. After a major earthquake, thousands of buildings may be uninhabitable. Hospitals may need to be rebuilt from the ground up. Insurance can help individual homeowners, but it does not cover public infrastructure. Charities can provide meals and temporary shelters, but they cannot replace bridges or restore entire neighborhoods. Without government leadership, these tasks remain unfinished, leaving gaps that affect every part of daily life. One of the biggest problems in disaster recovery is the way funding is handled. In many countries, including the United States, aid money must be approved by lawmakers after each disaster. This process often turns into a political fight. Different regions compete for limited resources, and decisions are delayed by debates that have nothing to do with the needs on the ground. Families waiting to rebuild their homes are left in limbo while officials argue. The Columbia Climate School has proposed a different approach. They suggest creating a national trust fund dedicated to rapid disaster reconstruction. This fund would be built up in advance, much like an emergency savings account. When disaster strikes, the money would be released automatically, without the need for political approval. This would speed up recovery and reduce uncertainty. Communities would know that help was coming and could plan accordingly. Predictable funding would also allow for smarter rebuilding. Right now, many recovery projects are rushed because communities are desperate to get people back into their homes. Short-term fixes often ignore long-term risks. For example, a house might be rebuilt in the same low-lying area where it was destroyed by a flood, with no changes to protect it from the next storm. If funding were steady and reliable, planners could take the time to build stronger, safer structures. This would save money in the long run and reduce the human toll of repeated disasters. The ethical reasons for government involvement are as important as the practical ones. When a disaster wipes out a town, the people affected are often left feeling powerless. Their jobs may be gone, their homes destroyed, and their savings depleted. Without outside help, despair can take hold. People may leave permanently, turning once thriving communities into ghost towns. This kind of economic hopelessness spreads far beyond the disaster zone. Nearby cities may see an influx of displaced residents who need housing, schools, and jobs. The national economy suffers when large numbers of people are unable to rebuild their lives. Reconstruction also raises questions of fairness. Not everyone has equal access to insurance, savings, or political influence. Wealthier families may be able to hire contractors quickly and navigate complicated paperwork. Poorer families, renters, and marginalized groups often face greater barriers. They may live in areas that were already underserved before the disaster, with weaker infrastructure and fewer resources. If the rebuilding process relies only on private effort, these inequalities grow worse. Entire neighborhoods can be left behind while others recover. Government programs can help level the field. By providing direct aid and setting clear rules, they ensure that everyone has a chance to rebuild, not just those with money or connections. For example, grants for home repairs can help low-income families return to safe housing. Publicly funded projects like school reconstruction and hospital rebuilding benefit entire communities. These efforts do more than replace physical structures. They signal that every citizen matters, regardless of wealth or status. Superstorm Sandy revealed how unequal recovery can become when systems fail. In some New York neighborhoods, rebuilding was swift. In others, especially those with lower incomes, progress was painfully slow. Families waited years for basic repairs. Some never returned home. This uneven pace created resentment and deepened existing divisions. Government action that is predictable and fair can prevent these outcomes. It can set standards that apply to everyone, ensuring that no group is left behind. The role of government extends beyond money. Policies can shape how rebuilding happens. Building codes, zoning laws, and environmental protections all influence the safety of future communities. For instance, stricter codes can require houses in hurricane zones to be elevated or built with stronger materials. Zoning rules can prevent development in areas that are too dangerous to inhabit. These decisions may be unpopular in the short term, especially when they limit where people can rebuild, but they save lives when the next disaster strikes. Climate change adds urgency to these policy choices. As storms, fires, and floods become more frequent, the cost of rebuilding will continue to rise. Government must plan not only for today's disasters, but also for those that are coming. This means investing in resilience, building infrastructure that can withstand extreme conditions, and creating systems that respond quickly to crises. It also means addressing the root causes of risk, such as unchecked development in floodplains or the destruction of natural barriers like wetlands and forests. A national trust fund for disaster recovery, as proposed by the Columbia Climate School, could support these efforts. By removing politics from the initial response, it would allow experts and local leaders to focus on what works. Communities would not have to wait for distant lawmakers to act. They could begin rebuilding immediately. Guided by clear plans and reliable resources, the idea of automatic funding reflects a deeper ethical stance. Disasters are not random personal failures. They are collective events that require collective solutions. When a town is wiped out by a wildfire or a hurricane, it is not just the problem of those who lived there. It is a challenge for the entire nation. Rapid, fair, and well-planned reconstruction is a way for a society to care for its members and preserve shared identity. Government involvement does not replace local action. Communities will always play a central role in recovery. Neighbors will still clear debris together, share food, and comfort one another. But these efforts need a larger framework to succeed. When governments provide the resources and policies needed to support them, recovery becomes more than survival. It becomes a path towards stability, safety, and dignity for everyone affected. When disaster strikes, survivors face a hard question. Do they rebuild their homes and communities or leave for good? This decision is rarely simple. It involves emotions, finances, safety, and a vision of the future. Some people stay because their roots run deep. Others leave because staying has become impossible. The choice is personal, but it is also shaped by forces larger than any one family. Many survivors choose to stay because of strong community ties. A neighborhood is more than a collection of buildings. It is a network of relationships built over years or even generations. People know their neighbors, share traditions, and rely on each other for support. Leaving means losing these connections. For some, that loss would be more painful than the disaster itself. A shared cultural identity also keeps people in place. When a town has a unique language, music, or way of life, rebuilding becomes a way to protect that heritage. To leave would feel like letting it disappear. Safety can also influence the decision to stay. If survivors believe they can rebuild with stronger standards, they may see a future in the same location. Modern building codes and materials can make homes more resistant to fire, wind, and water. Communities that invest in resilient infrastructure, like elevated roads or seawalls, give residents confidence that the next disaster will not be as destructive. Trust in leadership plays a role here. If local governments act quickly and transparently, people are more likely to stay. They need to believe that their efforts to rebuild will be supported by clear plans and reliable resources. After a wildfire, for example, a California town may hold public meetings where officials explain new firebreak designs, stricter building rules, and evacuation routes. If residents see progress and feel heard, they may commit to returning. They understand that no place is completely safe, but they feel empowered by the steps being taken. This trust can be fragile, though. If promises are broken or aid is slow, hope fades, and people begin to consider leaving. Sometimes, no amount of resilience is enough. Repeated disasters can make an area unlivable. When floods, fires, or storms strike again and again, families may lose the will to rebuild. Each time, the cost grows higher and the risk greater. After the third or fourth loss, even the most determined homeowner may decide to move. This pattern is especially common in places where climate change has altered the environment. Rising temperatures and shifting weather patterns mean that what was once rare now happens regularly. The collapse of infrastructure can also force relocation. A single house can be repaired, but a town cannot function without roads, power lines, hospitals, and schools. If these systems are not restored, daily life becomes too difficult. Children cannot attend classes, businesses cannot operate, and medical care becomes hard to reach. Over time, frustration drives people away. Even those who want to stay may have no choice if services never return. Money is another deciding factor. Insurance costs are rising, especially in areas prone to fires and floods. Some families discover that their premiums are higher than their mortgage payments. Others find that insurance companies will not cover them at all. Without financial support, rebuilding is impossible. Government aid can help, but it is often uneven and slow. Those who cannot afford to wait must leave. In this way, disasters do not only destroy buildings, they also create economic pressure that pushes people out. California offers many examples of towns caught between staying and leaving. After massive wildfires, some communities rebuild almost completely. Residents come together to clear debris, apply for permits, and construct homes with fire-resistant materials. They plant new trees, reopen schools, and celebrate small victories like the return of a local cafe. Their determination sends a clear message: this place still matters. In nearby areas, however, the story may be different. If the fire was especially intense, if it destroyed critical infrastructure, or if insurance payouts were denied, entire towns may vanish. Streets remain empty, and foundations sit exposed to the sun. Nature slowly takes over what was once a thriving neighborhood. The contrast between these outcomes can be stark. In one valley, you might see children riding bikes past new houses. In another, you might see only charred ruins and silence. The difference often comes down to resources and timing. A well-organized recovery plan and access to funds make rebuilding possible. Without them, even the strongest community bonds may not be enough. Coastal and island communities face similar choices as seas rise. Some fight back with engineering solutions like seawalls or raised buildings. They hold on to their land because it is tied to their identity. Fishing villages, for instance, may depend on proximity to the water for both income and tradition. Moving inland would mean more than losing homes. It would mean losing a way of life. Yet the ocean does not wait for cultural heritage. In certain places, the water advances each year, swallowing roads and fields. Flooding becomes constant, not occasional. Drinking water turns salty, crops fail, and houses collapse into the surf. At a certain point, relocation is the only option. Governments may organize managed retreats, buying properties and helping families move to safer ground. Even then, the process is painful. Entire communities must grieve the loss of their land while trying to start anew elsewhere. For example, some small island nations are already planning for the possibility that they will one day need to evacuate completely. Leaders negotiate with other countries for land where their people can live together, preserving their culture in exile. This planning is both practical and symbolic. It recognizes that climate change threatens not only physical safety, but also identity. The decision to stay or go often plays out within families. A young couple might want to move for the sake of their children, while older relatives insist on staying where they were born. These disagreements can cause tension. In some cases, families split apart, with one branch relocating and another remaining behind. Over time, the community itself fragments, its future uncertain. Trust in leadership can help guide these decisions. When officials provide clear information about risks and options, people can make informed choices. If they feel misled or ignored, anger grows and cooperation breaks down. This was seen after certain hurricanes, where mixed messages about safety led to confusion. Some residents rebuilt in areas that were later declared too dangerous, creating cycles of loss and frustration. As disasters become more frequent, the balance between staying and leaving shifts. Places once considered safe now face new threats. People must weigh tradition and memory against risk and cost. There is no single correct answer. Each community and each family within it must find its own path. Some will stay and rebuild with new strength. Others will leave, carrying their memories with them to new places. In either case, the decision marks a turning point, shaped by forces both intimate and immense. Rebuilding after disaster reveals how different societies respond to loss and renewal. Each place brings its own history, politics, and culture to the process. The choices communities make reflect not only the damage they suffered, but also their values and priorities. These global stories show that while destruction may look similar, the paths to recovery are deeply varied. In Warsaw, Poland, the destruction was deliberate. During World War II, the city was bombed and then systematically leveled by occupying forces. This was not an accident of war, but a plan to erase Warsaw's culture and identity. By the end of the conflict, whole districts were piles of rubble. The people who survived faced a question far bigger than where to live. They had to decide whether their city would vanish from history or rise again as a symbol of resistance. The decision to rebuild Warsaw was not about convenience. It was an act of defiance. Citizens collected old photographs and paintings to guide reconstruction. They salvaged bricks from the ruins and rebuilt streets and landmarks as they had been before the war. The work was slow and exhausting, but it gave people purpose. Each stone placed on top of another was a statement. Their culture would not be erased. Today, the restored old town looks centuries old, but most of it was rebuilt by hand after the war. This careful work turned a place of grief into a living monument, showing how rebuilding can preserve memory and fight against attempts to destroy a people's identity. In contrast, Haiti's experience after the 2010 earthquake shows the challenges of coordinating aid on a global scale. The earthquake killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions. Homes, hospitals, and government buildings collapsed. International aid poured in from dozens of countries and countless organizations. Planes filled with supplies landed in Port-au-Prince every day. On the surface, it looked like the world was responding with overwhelming generosity. But coordination was lacking. Agencies worked independently, sometimes duplicating efforts or leaving gaps. In one neighborhood, residents might receive food and water from 3 different groups, while another area went without. Corruption and weak government structures added to the chaos. Funds were promised, but never fully delivered. Buildings were constructed without proper oversight, leading to unsafe conditions. Years later, many Haitians were still living in temporary shelters, and progress was slow. This experience highlighted a painful truth. Money and goodwill alone do not guarantee recovery. Without strong planning and accountability, aid can become tangled in bureaucracy or lost to mismanagement. For rebuilding to succeed, local voices must guide the process. International groups can bring resources, but they must work with communities rather than impose outside solutions. Sustainability matters as much as speed. A school built quickly, but without proper design, may collapse in the next disaster. A program that provides short-term relief but no long-term strategy leaves people vulnerable to future crises. Japan's response to the 2011 tsunami shows a different model. When a massive earthquake triggered a tsunami, entire towns were swept away. The destruction was immense, but Japan had invested for decades in disaster planning. Emergency systems were in place. Evacuation routes were marked. And early warning systems gave people precious minutes to reach higher ground. While many lives were lost, these preparations saved countless others. After the disaster, Japan focused on rebuilding with precision and resilience. New seawalls were built, some higher and stronger than before. Towns were relocated to safer ground, and strict building codes were enforced. The process was orderly, even if it was painful for those who had to move. Communities participated in planning, ensuring that the rebuilt areas reflected local needs. Mental health support was integrated into recovery programs, recognizing the emotional toll of the disaster. The Japanese approach shows how preparation and careful planning can shape recovery. Disasters will always bring chaos, but systems built in advance can reduce suffering and speed rebuilding. This level of readiness requires long-term investment, something many countries struggle to maintain until a crisis forces attention. In California, the town of Paradise faced its own test after the 2018 wildfire. The fire moved so fast that many residents barely escaped with their lives. Thousands of homes were destroyed in a matter of hours. Afterward, the people of Paradise had to decide whether to return. For some, the answer was clear. Their love for the town and their memories tied to it made leaving unthinkable. They began to rebuild with fire-resistant materials and stricter codes. Their determination mirrored that of Warsaw's citizens, though on a smaller scale. Others could not afford to stay. Insurance premiums skyrocketed, and some companies refused to cover the area at all. Utilities were damaged, and basic services like schools and hospitals took time to return. For families with limited resources, rebuilding was financially impossible. Even those who wanted to return faced barriers like unpaid claims or delays in permits. Some moved away permanently, scattering the community across the region. Paradise shows how love of home can collide with harsh realities. Emotional bonds are powerful, but they cannot always overcome economic pressure or repeated risk. As wildfires grow more frequent with climate change, more towns may face the same dilemma. These stories reveal the complex layers of recovery. Warsaw's rebuilding was driven by cultural survival. Haiti's challenges were rooted in global coordination and local governance. Japan's success came from preparation and precision. Paradise's struggle reflects the growing conflict between identity and risk in a changing climate. The lessons are not simple. No single approach works everywhere, but taken together, these experiences show that rebuilding is never just about bricks and wood. It is about memory, trust, and the systems that connect people to each other and to the wider world. Whether a city rises again, falters, or disappears depends on choices made long before and after disaster strikes. These choices shape not only the future of a single community, but also the lessons that others will carry forward when their own time of loss arrives. The disasters of tomorrow will not look exactly like those of the past. Climate change, rapid urban growth, and fragile infrastructure are creating new threats. Cities built decades ago were not designed for rising seas, stronger hurricanes, longer wildfire seasons, or record-breaking heat. Preparing for what lies ahead requires more than rebuilding after each event. It demands planning, innovation, and choices that balance safety, cost, and the needs of communities. Urban planning is at the center of this effort. Cities that adapt to climate risks before disaster strikes can reduce damage and save lives. In coastal areas, this may mean constructing seawalls or restoring wetlands to absorb storm surges. Some cities, like Rotterdam in the Netherlands, have built flood barriers and water plazas that double as public spaces when dry. These projects do more than hold back water. They integrate protection into the daily life of the city. Wildfire-prone regions face different challenges. Towns surrounded by forests can create fire buffers by clearing vegetation and spacing buildings farther apart. New homes can be built with fire-resistant materials like metal roofs and treated wood. Roads can be designed to provide clear evacuation routes. After the 2018 Paradise wildfire, many California communities began enforcing stricter building codes to prevent a repeat of the disaster. These measures are costly, but they give people a fighting chance when flames return. Earthquake zones require yet another set of solutions. Older buildings may be reinforced with seismic upgrades, adding steel frames or flexible joints that allow them to sway instead of collapse. New construction can follow strict standards that account for the movement of the ground. Japan's response to earthquakes has shown how careful design saves lives. After the 2011 tsunami, the country invested heavily in both infrastructure and early warning systems, proving that preparation works when disaster strikes. While governments and planners play a key role, families and communities also have responsibilities. Preparedness begins at home. Families can create disaster plans that outline where to meet if separated, how to contact one another, and what routes to take if evacuation is necessary. Emergency kits with water, food, medication, and basic tools can make the difference between chaos and stability in the first hours after a disaster. Insurance is another vital layer of protection. While it can be expensive, especially in high-risk areas, it provides a financial safety net. Understanding what policies cover and what they do not is essential. Communities can take preparedness further by training local response teams. Neighbors who know first aid or basic rescue techniques can act quickly while waiting for professional help. Some towns run regular drills, simulating floods or fires so that residents understand evacuation routes and communication systems. These exercises may feel uncomfortable, but they save lives when real danger comes. Policy changes will determine how well future disasters are managed. Smarter zoning laws are one of the most effective tools. Building in high-risk areas, like floodplains or unstable hillsides, sets the stage for repeated loss. Restricting development in these zones can prevent tragedies. In some cases, governments may need to buy out homeowners and convert land to parks or natural barriers. These decisions are difficult because they involve displacement and the loss of familiar spaces. However, continuing to rebuild in dangerous areas traps communities in a cycle of destruction. Disaster response strategies must also evolve. Speed matters. The longer people wait for shelter, food, and medical care, the more a disaster compounds its harm. Technology can help by streamlining communication and logistics. For example, apps that track shelter availability or send evacuation alerts can reach people faster than traditional systems. However, technology is only as good as the policies behind it. Clear chains of command and coordination between agencies are crucial. Without them, even the best tools fail. As risks grow, relocation will become part of the conversation. In some places, rebuilding is no longer sustainable. Rising seas may claim entire neighborhoods. Rivers may flood every year despite levees and pumps. Fires may return season after season, consuming homes as soon as they are rebuilt. In these cases, staying puts lives and resources in constant danger. Encouraging relocation does not mean forcing people to leave against their will. It means providing clear information about risks and offering fair support to help families move safely. Some island nations are already facing this reality. Leaders are negotiating with other countries for land where their citizens can live together if their islands become uninhabitable. This planning is heartbreaking, but it gives people a future instead of leaving them to face disaster alone. On a smaller scale, towns in Alaska have begun moving entire communities inland as permafrost melts and shorelines erode. These moves require careful coordination, not only to build new homes, but to preserve cultural traditions and community ties. Preparing for tomorrow's disasters also means addressing inequality. Vulnerable populations often live in the most dangerous areas because housing is cheaper there. They may lack insurance, transportation, or access to information. Without targeted policies, these groups will bear the heaviest burdens. Disaster planning must include affordable housing options, accessible evacuation routes, and outreach programs in multiple languages. When everyone has the tools to prepare, the whole community becomes stronger. Examples from around the world show both successes and failures. The Netherlands has invested in flood defenses for centuries, protecting land that lies below sea level. Their system of dikes and barriers is a model of proactive planning. In contrast, some coastal cities in other countries continue to expand construction in flood-prone areas, setting up future losses. After Hurricane Katrina, parts of New Orleans were rebuilt with higher levees and redesigned wetlands, showing that lessons can be learned. Yet other neighborhoods were left behind, revealing how uneven recovery can be. The coming decades will bring more storms, fires, earthquakes, and heat waves. Each disaster will test not only physical structures, but also social systems. Communities that plan ahead will face these challenges with greater strength. Those that ignore the warning signs will face repeated tragedy. The choice is not only about engineering or technology, it is about values. Building resilient cities requires commitment to safety, fairness, and foresight. Families must prepare, Governments must lead, and societies must be willing to make hard decisions before disaster forces them to act. In a future shaped by climate change, preparation is not optional. It is the difference between survival and collapse. The tools exist: seawalls, fire buffers, seismic upgrades, early warning systems, and well-practiced evacuation plans. What matters now is the will to use them, not after disaster strikes, but before. The disasters of tomorrow are already forming. How we plan today will decide what survives when they arrive. Rebuilding after disaster is about far more than replacing what was lost. When people clear rubble, raise walls, and reopen schools, they're not just repairing physical structures. They are making a statement about who they are and what they believe in. Every brick, beam, and nail carries meaning. To rebuild is to declare that destruction will not define the future. It sends a message to survivors, to outsiders, and to generations yet to come. We endured, and we chose to rise again. This symbolic power matters deeply. When a city rises from ashes, it proves that tragedy, no matter how great, can be met with action and hope. Children growing up in a rebuilt community see living proof that loss can be overcome. They learn that the past may leave scars, but it does not end the story. In this way, rebuilding becomes a bridge between those who suffered and those who will inherit the future. It keeps memory alive while showing that survival is possible. The emotional weight of reconstruction can be seen in places like Warsaw after World War II. The city was not rebuilt only to provide housing or commerce. It was rebuilt to preserve identity. Each restored building stood as a quiet act of defiance against those who had tried to erase its culture. Even today, the cobblestone streets of Warsaw's old town remind visitors that resilience is not abstract. It is built, brick, by people who refuse to disappear. This sense of meaning is not limited to war. After a wildfire, when families return to charred ground and begin to rebuild, they are doing more than constructing houses. They are reclaiming their connection to the land. After a hurricane, when a school reopens and children gather in classrooms again, the sound of their voices becomes a symbol of renewal. These actions tell the world that communities are more than the disasters that strike them. But rebuilding is never equal. Some places rise quickly because resources flow in, while others are left behind. This creates a moral question: who gets rebuilt and who does not? After a major disaster, aid often follows patterns of wealth and power. Neighborhoods with political influence or higher property values receive attention first. Poorer areas wait longer, or they are abandoned altogether. This inequality has lasting effects. When one part of a city recovers while another remains in ruins, divisions deepen. Residents feel betrayed, and trust in leadership erodes. In New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, some neighborhoods were rebuilt with speed and care, while others were neglected for years. These disparities were not accidents. They reflected long-standing social and racial inequalities that shaped which lives were valued most. The ethics of recovery go beyond physical rebuilding. Fairness must guide decisions about who receives help, how resources are distributed, and which communities are prioritized. A family that loses its home to a flood should not face a longer or harder path to recovery simply because of income or race. Justice requires clear policies that protect the vulnerable and ensure equal access to support. Insurance plays a role in this divide. Wealthier homeowners are more likely to have coverage, and their claims are often processed faster. Those without insurance depend on government aid, which can be slow or limited. Renters face even greater challenges, as they may lose their homes without having any right to reconstruction funds. When entire groups are left without help, the very fabric of the community unravels. Post-disaster policies can either repair or deepen these wounds. Programs that rebuild public schools, hospitals, and roads send a message of shared commitment. They show that everyone's future matters. Policies that focus only on private property or ignore the needs of displaced families send the opposite message. They imply that some lives are expendable. The choice of what to rebuild also carries symbolic weight. When a landmark is restored, it signals continuity. When it is left in ruins, it may reflect either neglect or a deliberate decision to move on. In Hiroshima, the preserved atomic bomb dome stands alongside new buildings as a reminder of history and a warning to the future. This balance between remembrance and progress is delicate but necessary. It allows communities to honor their losses without being trapped by them. At the heart of rebuilding lies a question of values. Are we simply putting things back the way they were, or are we shaping a better and fairer future? Reconstruction is a chance to correct old flaws. Stronger building codes can prevent future disasters. Redesigned neighborhoods can offer safer housing and better access to services. Inclusive planning can give a voice to those who were previously ignored. These decisions are not technical alone. They reflect moral choices about whose safety, dignity, and history are protected. If a coastal town is rebuilt with luxury homes, while longtime residents are pushed inland, the message is clear. Profit matters more than community. If rebuilding prioritizes public spaces, affordable housing, and cultural landmarks, it signals a commitment to shared well-being. The symbolic power of reconstruction extends beyond the local level. When a country rebuilds a city or region, it demonstrates its strength to the world. After the 2011 tsunami, Japan's careful and resilient rebuilding showed global audiences what planning and unity could achieve. When aid efforts falter, as they did in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, the failure is visible too. The world sees not only the rubble, but also the systems that failed to clear it. For individuals, the meaning of rebuilding is personal. A grandmother planting a new tree where her old garden once stood. A child drawing pictures of a new house while living in temporary shelter. A carpenter shaping beams for a neighbor's roof. Each action is a step toward healing. These small gestures matter as much as grand projects. They remind people that the human spirit persists even when material things are lost. The work of reconstruction is slow and often painful. There are setbacks, delays, and conflicts. Yet the very act of continuing is powerful. It tells survivors and future generations that despair did not win. Even when walls collapse and streets vanish, the decision to rebuild says that life will continue. In the end, rebuilding is a form of resistance. It pushes back against chaos, violence, and neglect. It transforms grief into action. When communities rise from the ruins, they send a message that echoes far beyond the boundaries of the disaster zone. We rebuild not just homes, but the human spirit itself. In the face of tragedy, rebuilding becomes our most powerful form of resistance and renewal. It is how we remember, how we honor, and how we create a future shaped not by destruction, but by the strength of those who refuse to give up.